Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our panelists. Director of the Institute for Complex Quantum Systems, University of Ulm, Germany, Tommaso Calarco. Philosophy professor and serial entrepreneur, Damon Horowitz. Professor of Philosophy and History of Science, University of Exeter, UK, Sabina Leonelli. Co-founder and director of Porsche Limited UK, Elizabeth Politzer. Minister of Information and Communication Technology and Minister of Public Sector Development Jordan, Majd Shwekeh. Distinguished Professor in Cybersecurity, Technology and Society, Dartmouth College, USA, Venkatramanan Subrahmanyan. And our moderator, Chairman, Institute of Diplomacy and Business UK, Stephen Cole.
Good morning, everyone. It's a real privilege to be back in Jordan, and it is amazing what can happen at forums like, and Princess Sumaya, of course, Her Royal Highness. And I met an environmentalist who lives in a palace. Today at breakfast, I met a scientist who lives in a mud hut in Kenya. It's amazing the number of people you meet here. And it's a fantastic panel we have, but I just wanted to make one or two observations this morning. Jordan, from a journalistic point of view, from my point of view, sets an example for the entire region, not just in science leadership, thanks to Her Royal Highness, but also, I think, in diplomacy too. If other countries followed Jordan's example, the region would be a better place. But we are all living in an era of the unprecedented, and that brings with it opportunities and challenges to society in all changes and sizes, from health to science to education and politics. Last week, John Kennedy, a Republican senator for Louisiana, told Facebook, Google, and Twitter, "Your power sometimes scares me." Twitter just doubled the number of characters you can use. So technological and digital advances have risen exponentially in recent years, changing the lives of those with access to them while leaving those without somewhat in the dark. We'll be looking at that issue this morning. The digital age is also bringing about a paradigm shift through innovations in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the Internet of Things, which could possibly widen the gap between the affluent West, us, and those in the developing world. Because of the pace of change, could many be left outside the loop? And the big question of all we're addressing today, will digitalization transformation raise living standards for all of us? And closely related, how will the fourth industrial revolution drive productivity in the years to come? And that's why a key part of our discussion this morning surrounds inclusivity. In other words, the ability to ensure that technological and digital transformation shouldn't lead to greater disparities. The digital impact on our lives and behaviors is intense, with many sharing their lives with Silicon Valley, knowingly or otherwise. And we now know well how it's being used by advertisers and politicians to target us all individually. The pressure to keep up has never been so intense. My youngest son is a doctor who's just qualified, and he's just started a master's in neuropsychology. And he said he had an honors degree in neuroscience 3 years ago, and he said he's just started his course, and a lot of what he'd learned 3 years ago is now considered defunct. That's the kind of pace of change we're looking at. And what is so important is to acknowledge the change, and how we anticipate and react to it will define us, because change is one of life's constants. And progress is impossible without it. And those who cannot change their minds can't change anything. Technology is reinventing every day. Now we have 6 speakers on the panel. So we're going to limit our presentations to about 7 or 8 minutes, maximum about 10, so we can have a lively and a moderated discussion. Considering the broad experience of this panel, I'm going to list a few of the points we might like to frame in that discussion. And how can policy harness the benefits of digitalization for all? How can a small developing nation like Jordan leverage new technologies? Well, borders, that's the zeitgeist at the moment to talk about borders. Should they be there, should they not? Will they fall or rise with digital transformation? So some of those issues we're going to be talking about. But let's hear first from our speaker, and I'm very happy to introduce Jordan's Minister of Information and Communications Technology, Marja Shweka, who I've known from before through the Global Thinkers Forum. Her Excellency was appointed Minister of Information and Communications Technology in March 2015, and was then appointed as Minister of Information and Communications Technology and Minister of Public Sector Development last year. Her Excellency will be addressing how such technologies are impacting in Jordan and what Jordan is doing to embrace the changes resulting therein and the role the Jordanian government is taking. So Her Excellency, Majid, over to you.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Stephen, for the introduction. First, I would like to extend my thanks and appreciation to Her Royal Highness, Princess Sumaya. Great job. Fantastic venue, fantastic environment, and we would like really to thank you for all your efforts. Very well done, and chapeau. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you all to our safe haven, to the country of pride, dignity, respect, humanity, and hospitality. We welcome you to Jordan. Let me start with a quote for His Majesty King Abdullah. It says, "In our era, connectivity defines how we live and interact in our work, our communities, our schools, our lives. Only a few years ago, we had the Internet of computers. Now, we talk about the Internet of things, but above them all must be the Internet of humanity. A hyper-connection bringing us together in collective consciousness and common cause." End of quote. With this statement, which has a very deep meaning and a huge responsibility, how can we leverage on this digital transformation in our lives, in the way we work, in the way we employ, in the way we deliver our services to the citizen? My appointment as a Minister of Public Sector Development didn't happen by coincidence. It just happened because we strongly believe that development in the public sector cannot happen without digitizing the way we communicate with citizens. Does not happen if we don't simplify and re-engineer our services in a way to make it easy, with a very, let's say, infrastructure that is technologically ready in Jordan. We are very proud to say that we have what it takes. We do have, and I need to move to the second slide. Basically, we understand that enhancing citizens' life, improving the business environment, and reaching the efficiency and the effectiveness we want to reach or achieve at the government level, we definitely have to digitize our services. And of course, this is the journey we are driving. First of all, we thought, where we're going to start? What are we going to do? How do we transfer and transform our services into digital services? And that's exactly what we're trying to do as we speak. In year 2000, His Majesty launched something called initiative. The initiative he launched is called REACH. R for regulation, E for enabling environment, A for advanced programs, C for capital, and H for human resources. We went from knowledge economy, and now in 2016, we launched REACH 2025, which speaks about digital economy. Why digital economy? We stopped seeing ICT as a standalone sector. We started to see that the ICT should go across all sectors: health, finance, communication, clean tech, security. That's why we strongly believe that the growth, the productivity, and everything we would like to achieve to have a sustainable growth in the economy should rely heavily on the digitalization of the economy. That's exactly the reason why we are focused now on Reach 2025, which is a roadmap for us to go and achieve the needed growth in economy in terms of GDP. In terms of GDP growth, we strongly believe that going into digitalization of these sectors will add to 6 to 8% in terms of GDP growth. Moreover, it will create 130,000 new jobs. But these new jobs, which means we need new skills. We can't, one of the challenges we're facing, that there is still a disconnect between the output of education and the digitalization era. In terms of skills, we know IoTs, 3D printers, data analytics, robotics are the new waves of digitalization. So if we don't have the right connect between where we're heading, where we're going, and the output of education, then it could be one of our major challenges. Speaking about digitalization, there are 4 key areas where we strongly believe that should be our key focus between now and 2025. The first one, innovation. Innovation as a mindset. Innovation as a culture. Innovation should be in our DNA, and it's not something impossible. We just need to stretch out of the box and start really unleashing the potential we have in our minds and in our space, because we do have so many opportunities, but we have to learn how to get them by empowering people around us. The second one is startups and entrepreneurship. We have seen that business models are changing. We cannot rely on the legacy business models or traditional business models. We have to start to create new business models. We have to empower our entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurship, to me, means employment, means self-employment, means empowerment, and empowerment leads to potential economic growth. The third one, which is the public sector transformation. We cannot tell people, go innovate and create and basically motivating, encouraging entrepreneurship if we don't have transformation from within. So we need to have transformation from within the government to make sure that we have the lucrative system to avail all the technological evolution. The fourth one is the skills and the capacity building. We are privileged in Jordan that we have very young population. More than 70% of our population is below 30 years old. Yeah. And Jordan has been known for its talents, for its high caliber people. Mainly, we consider it as our main asset. So how can we really leverage on this opportunity by making sure that we do have the right talents to drive the future? And this is the fourth element, which is very important to us. And this is expectations. If we proceed with the plan and we execute as planned, as I said before, we should be able to accelerate the economic growth. Probably I need just to talk a little bit about the digital transformation in the government. You know that the government, one of our main challenges, or one of the main, let's say, not complaints, but one of the feedback we keep hearing days and days, that you have a very bureaucratic system, that it's very slow. And we know that we need to transform all the services in the government. By doing that, we know that we can achieve several benefits. One of them is the rule of law in the public sector. Digitization would help us in enforcing the rule of law in the public sector. Why? Because we are cutting on the interaction between the service provider and the person and the citizen or the business asking for the service. We call our plan the 777 plan for digitizing Jordan. Why do we call it 777? We realized that we have 7 major entities in the government providing the services needed at the citizen level and at the business level. We categorized our business into 4 key pillars or value chains. We have the value chain of the citizen and all the services for the citizen. We have the value chain for the business and everything related to doing business, starting business, ending business. We have the value chain for the government, e-procurement, e-correspondence, and we have the value chain for e-resident, especially that, as you know, Jordan, we have more than 1.5 million refugees from Syria. So all these elements have been taken into consideration and said, okay, let's do 777 plan. We start by our 7 entities, 7 enablers, and 7 steps. For us, having this plan as a common aligned vision to get us to a paperless government by 2020 was a must. At the beginning, when I joined the government, I thought we have been hearing about e-government since the year 2002, 2003. What happened? One of our major issues, we never had an aligned vision. We never had an aligned purpose. We never had an aligned plan. So to me, and to make sure that we have a sustainable plan, it was very important that we do, let's say, the roadmap, very specific actions, very specific entities with a very focused direction and towards the steps needed. When we look at the 7 entities, it was, to me, one of the most challenging elements because some of the entities are not ready, not from technological perspective, but from a mindset perspective.
Lovely.
And that, to me, was the biggest challenge. How to get the people from within to accept digitalization of services. How to build the trust between the digital service and the citizen. That was the second challenge, especially because we have 80% of our people unbanked. They still believe in cash. And when I say end-to-end digital services, which means there is no human interaction, it depends heavily on having the e-service transactionally made through the mobiles or the handsets, which means that we have to accept something called e-payment.
Minister, if you can move to your last point.
Yes. So that's why I think now we're very proud that we have what it takes. We do have the right infrastructure. We are, let's say, in a country that is 87% penetration rate in terms of internet, more than 150% penetration rate in terms of mobile handsets, and we keep saying that evolve or dissolve. That's my saying every time we meet. I say we have to evolve, otherwise we dissolve. We have the will, and if there is a will, there is a way. Thank you.
Very good. Very good. You know, I think one of the most exciting things you talked about there, and there's a range of initiatives you've launched, is the demographic in Jordan. I mean, we're talking about the next generation here. And what was the number under 30? 70%. 70% of the country under 30. So how long before you lead Jordan or the Middle East into its first Silicon Valley in the Middle East?
Well, one of the, let's say, very passionate areas we're working on in a very aligned manner, starting with the vision of His Majesty. I'd like to see Jordan as a regional ICT hub. Honestly speaking, I think we have what it takes. The most important of which we're working on is having the right legislative enabling system or legislation towards enabling entrepreneurship. With this disruptive technology, you have to know that it's not easy to have the right legislations. When I talk the open data policy and digital policy, these are controversial in nature. Open data policy, which means I'm availing all the data, all the public data of the country to people to start innovating new businesses and new services. We have a huge opportunities. When we talk about women empowerment, this is another opportunity. 13% of women are economically active. So we still have
very high in the Middle
huge,
East.
let's say, uptake by using and leveraging on the technological readiness we have.
Lovely. Minister, thank you very much
Thank you.
indeed. And if we have time, certainly welcome questions to the Minister about her leadership, technology leadership in Jordan. We're going to move on to our next speaker, Professor V.S. Subramanian. And for ease, I'm going to call him VS from now on. I hope you don't mind. He is the Dartmouth College Distinguished Professor in Cybersecurity, Technology and Society. And he's come on with a bang, so I shall stop my introduction and allow VS to take over.
Ladies and gentlemen, Your Royal Highness, Your Excellency, it's a great pleasure to be in such a warm, loving, and friendly country. Thank you for having me. I often hear that we're in the middle of a digital revolution, but I think that's not exactly correct. We're at the very beginning of a digital revolution, not quite in the middle, and I think we have a long way to go. Today's digital revolution is driven by a trifecta of factors. First, and I'll talk about each of them in some more detail, the very first is the preponderance and ubiquity of devices of all kinds, better known as the Internet of Things. We talk today about mobile phones, but guess what? These devices are coming closer and closer to us. At this point, they're slowly starting to get embedded in our bodies, and I'll talk about that in a minute. The second is the fact that as the number of these devices increases, the amount of data that they generate is exponentially increasing as well. Not just in volume, but also in diversity. Image data, video data, signal data, in addition to multilingual text data, and so much more. But what is actually driving the biggest innovations in combination with these two developments is the rapid increase in machine learning. The improvement in machine learning that's allowing us to learn predictive models of all kinds of things, and then using those models to shape outcomes to be more consistent with what we'd like. Let me say a little bit about these things one by one. We're all familiar with iPhones, cell phones, wearable devices, watches, smart homes, meters, etc. But let me go to something slightly different. The picture at the bottom right, the small white circular picture you see here, is a device that's being manufactured today by a company called Helios, with whom I have no affiliation whatsoever, just for the record. And this is revolutionizing the concept of a pill, the kinds of pills that you take for medical conditions your doctor prescribes. In the past, pills used to be, the doctor would tell you, you've got to take this pill twice a day or thrice a day, once in the morning, once in the afternoon, once at night, for 5 days. And guess what? I don't know about all of you, both in the audience and on the podium, but almost everybody I know has forgotten to take some of these pills, despite the prescription. And this has significant consequences from both an economic and a public health perspective. If you don't take the pills and the full dosage of the pills, the pathogen that causes the disease does not die out. Instead, it evolves, to take a line from the Honorable Minister, it evolves, it adapts, and the drugs that are used to kill the pathogen no longer work. So the companies in question have to reinvent their medications every year or so, increasing costs on everyone. Helios built this device, which is a pill, but it's actually a bunch of sensors. And what it does is to track how a patient is adhering to his or her prescription drug regimen. The next generation is not going to ask you to take pills 3 times a day for 10 days. Instead, you're going to swallow a pill once, and that pill is going to dispense 3 things. It's going to consist of 3 things: medication, sensors, and the ability to communicate what's going on in your body to your phone or a device near you. And this is going to have profound consequences both for public health and for the pharmaceutical companies involved. And that's what we want. It's a win-win-win for the patient, the pharmaceutical company, and the public health system. The only one who loses out is the pathogen, which is exactly what we'd like. This is going to have other consequences as well, and I'll come to that momentarily. All of these devices are generating huge amounts of data. The chart here shows you, don't worry about the, I'd just like you to look at the slope of that chart. What you're seeing here is an exponential increase in the amount of data that's being generated on a yearly basis. In fact, this goes only up to 2020. If I increase this exponential curve out a few years, it would climb almost vertically up towards the top. That's a stratospheric increase in the amount of data that's being generated. The third part of this equation, I felt I had to put a spreadsheet on there, is machine learning. Irrespective of which application we look at, I put down examples of 5 or 6 applications I've worked on to mirror the comments of the Honorable Minister. These are all multidisciplinary situations where stakeholders from different disciplines come together to solve a problem. So for example, you can take data from many different disciplines or many different application areas and, represent it as a spreadsheet. So this little picture here shows you a spreadsheet. And the rows in the spreadsheet, for example, may be associated with different Twitter accounts, for instance. So the first row might be Twitter account 1, second row might be Twitter account 2, etc. And I'm coloring some of these rows. So if a row was known to be a bot trying to do something illicit, I'm coloring it red. If it was not, I'm coloring it blue. What machine learning tries to, and the same sort of picture applies whether I'm looking at bots or whether I'm looking at, say, cells, regions of a game park where poaching events are occurring. I might color a row red if the cell or the region of the park associated with that cell had poaching incidents occur in it before or not. So what machine learning is trying to do is to learn conditions on the columns, the measurements we take about these accounts on Twitter, the measurements and factors, geographic, cultural, other factors associated with the regions on the ground, and say, can we learn a condition on these variables such that when the condition is true, the event we are modeling happens with high probability. When the condition is false, the event that we're modeling happens with low probability. There are some other things to worry about as well, which I won't go into. But this is my one-slide explanation of machine learning. We're looking for such conditions, and I've given some sample conditions. When you hear about hundreds of machine learning algorithms, they differ in the kinds of conditions they're looking for. I've given 2 lines there with very different kinds of conditions. Don't worry about them. But this is what we're looking for in machine learning. And once we learn such a model, it tells me that by changing those conditions, I can change, or at least have a chance of changing the outcome. That's what leads to policies. So for example, in my lab, we develop policies for counterterrorism actions against certain terrorist groups by learning such predictive models, putting out predictions, and using the models to go back and say, here's what we can do about it. So, I never think of risks. This session is called Challenges and Opportunities. I think I talked about opportunities. Anybody who's got data, has native intelligence and good educational background and a supportive ecosystem can come up with great ideas in their local ecosystem, take it to the region, and then go to the world with it. But at the same time, there are risks. And cyber risk is a big one. But I'd like to say that for every risk that's out there is also an opportunity, okay? So risks and opportunities go hand in hand.
1 minute.
So let me give you an example of what's happening with cyber risk. All of you have seen examples of attacks. Well, guess how long it is before people know an attack has even happened? A study by friends at Symantec, the cybersecurity firm, says it's 300 plus days. That's almost a year that an attack has been successfully executed before you even knew it happened. There are celebrated attacks of this kind. A major US insurer a few years ago was attacked in April of a year. It was November before they knew the attack had happened. To make it even worse, there are these things called patches that your antivirus periodically might ask you to take action on. Well, guess what? Even corporations, on average, it's 4 months from the time a patch is released to the time it's put in. So what this means is that if I'm an attacker, I don't even have to be very smart. I don't have to develop attacks. I just take attacks that are on the market, and I'm pretty sure that I have a 4-month window, or at least a month, to execute those attacks before anybody knows what's happening.
You start to wrap, please, Ben.
Okay, yeah. So let me skip. So a little bit. So this is I want to conclude, actually, with some new kinds of attacks and close the loop back on the pill example. As these new devices come out, as these new kinds of software and analytic models come out, the ability to carry out attacks increases exponentially. Every new device, every new software offers new opportunities to an attacker because they all have vulnerabilities. If I was a malicious hacker, which I'd like to say I'm not, the new pills that I was talking about provides me an opportunity. You may have all heard of ransomware, where an attacker encrypts the files in your system and says, look, I'm not giving you your files back unless you pay a certain amount of money to me in Bitcoin.
It's happening.
Well, those kinds of attacks are going to be much more prevalent. In the last few years, we've seen them attack police stations in the US, hospitals, many other targets, and guess what? Lots of them pay, including the police.
Okay.
So the ability to carry out attacks, and say the pill example, would say, well, if I'm an attacker, I'm going to drop a little bit of medication into your system to show you I can do it, and then say, if you don't follow my instructions and transfer this amount of money, I'm going to drop everything. You're going to overdose and potentially die. So again, let me conclude with this one comment. I have more slides, but I'll skip them. But let me conclude with this one comment. We're going to see dramatically new kinds of attacks, but those new kinds of attacks and risks are great opportunities for businesses who want to mitigate those attacks, mitigate those risks, build the products needed to help secure our workspace. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much, V.S. I'm just wondering if there's a pill you can take that will guarantee somebody innovates. But on cyber security, I was moderating a session at the House of Commons about cyber security. And the major finding was that none of the politicians knew anything about cybersecurity whatsoever. And they were all reliant on people selling their cyberware. So the point is, the question is, and briefly if you will, how can politicians and governments learn more about how to fight off cyber attacks?
So I think cybersecurity education has got to reach the same level as ordinary, hygiene that we teach our children. Kids are learning to use devices from the time they are 1, if not even younger. And so understanding what's right and what's wrong is something that needs to be done from the ground up. It may be a little too late for the politicians, but I think we all learn from our children and our nieces and nephews.
That's
and
the reason you have children, so they can teach you IT, isn't it?
Exactly.
All right, yes, thanks for that. Our next speaker is Dr. Sabina Leonelli, Professor of Philosophy and History of Science at the University of Exeter in the UK. She serves as the co-director of the Exeter Centre for the Study of Life Sciences, where she leads the Data Studies research strand, and is also a member of the Open Science Policy Platform of the European Commission, where she's heading towards after this plenary session. So, Sabina, over to you.
Thank you very much. It is a great honor to be here, and I want to thank our gracious hosts and the organizers of this World Science Forum, particularly for promoting the participation of excellent young researchers from all over the globe, which I think is really a wonderful sign that we are supporting the future of science as a global endeavor. So what I want to talk about here is the role of open and big data in contemporary society. I'm not going to say much about big data per se. I think VS has already presented what we're talking about here. But I want to kind of go a little bit back to the second step he was talking about in his presentation and talk about what actually are the grounds on which machine learning can be effective and on which we can actually build effective digital services, which is the availability of data we can trust. Now, I think there's a very well-justified fear that the development of digital technologies and artificial intelligence based on big and open data may actually widen existing inequalities and social divides. And this is what I want to discuss. So I think one of the things to note about big and open data, certainly about big data, is that these are the more valuable, the more they're actually moved around and across different contexts. So they need to travel to new sites, and they need to be interpreted and reinterpreted in relation to lots of different questions and lots of different problems. So in this sense, the rise of open data, sorry, and I'm gonna go to my slide, is actually very strongly related to and intertwined with the rise of what we call open science, a movement which is very strongly promoted by several governments right now in the world, and particularly is being strongly endorsed by the European Commission, the European Union. And it consists in taking advantage of digital platforms and communication technologies to revolutionize how knowledge is created, how it is circulated, and how it is assessed around the globe. So the juncture of big and open data promises to transform human abilities to tackle global challenges. We've seen many examples of this at the forum, and VS has talked about some of these examples. At the same time, it also has the potential to profoundly undermine the legitimacy, the credibility, and the trustworthiness of scientific expertise if it is badly handled. And also, it has the potential to expand the already overwhelming divide between those who benefit from digital technologies and those who are losing out. So over the last decade, my research has focused on investigating how data are disseminated and used and reused across a very wide variety of contexts, very often within the sciences, but also beyond science. I've also looked at what is going on in several different locations, ranging from low-income countries to high-income countries. So my group did this largely through qualitative social science methods and humanities methods. We interviewed a large variety of people who deal with data on a daily basis, people who produce data, who disseminate and steward data, and reuse the data. We talked to them about their experiences and their perceptions, and we studied their practices, and most importantly, the history of those practices and why people do things the way they do. I also consulted extensively on this topic with members of the Open Science Working Group of the Global Young Academy, and with a variety of European stakeholders ranging from major universities to libraries and publishers, and representatives of member states as part of my work for the European Commission at the moment. So building on this research and these engagements, I want to highlight three major concerns which I see as associated to the ways in which big and open data are currently managed. The first concern is the unsustainable nature currently of the digital data landscape, and the urgent need to find business models that can actually support data storage, sharing, and analysis in the longer term. Open science is not quick and is not cheap by any means. It requires digital and material infrastructures that are only effective when they're efficiently maintained and they're constantly, regularly updated. And yet, there is no clarity at the moment on who should shoulder the costs for all this work, for how long, and how this should be coordinated both locally and internationally. The second concern I want to highlight is around the quality and credibility of the data themselves, and of course the processes used to transform this data into knowledge. This is the era of fake news, and it is more important than ever to provide credible evidence for knowledge claims.
Absolutely.
Yet, most data collection, certainly in the world of publicly sponsored research databases, lacks effective systems of review and of quality control. Similarly, there is very little scrutiny of the assumptions and the bias that go into data mining algorithms which are used for data retrieval and analysis. The global reach and the multiple locations of all of these interconnected databases which are currently hosting big and open data makes it harder to trace accountabilities for how these systems were built and how they actually shape data interpretation. It is very difficult, in other words, to actually point out who is responsible when things go wrong in these kinds of systems. And finally, the push to recycle existing data, certainly within publicly sponsored research, may also provide a disincentive for creative novel research and foster a culture of conservatism in research and in innovation. The third and final concern I want to highlight is around the extent to which big and open data are reinforcing existing social divides. For instance, by favoring data sources that represent only privileged individuals and communities. Now, my co-panelists will say much more about this, so I will not spend time on this. I will only stress from my perspective that the vast majority of currently available large research databases actually display work, by and large, produced by rich English-speaking groups, with very little representation from less visible and more vulnerable groups. So I believe that actually it is possible and necessary, just to make sure that yes, that it is possible and necessary to overcome these challenges. And this needs urgent action. So substantial investment and effort needs to go into data governance and the stewardship. So not just on how we actually, the fact that we have digital infrastructure, but how we actually develop them and how we maintain them. A key priority, I think, is supporting fairness in the handling of data. One way in which this can be done is to monitor, identify the exclusions and inequalities that are built into data pipelines. Also to invest in adequate data expertise and skills that can support this effort, and develop intelligent and, most importantly, ethical ways of sharing data. Other priorities also include supporting mechanisms to promote the quality and trustworthiness of data sources and analytic tools, investing in sustainable data infrastructures, so resources that are actually interoperable, that are surviving in the long term, that are internationally coordinated and publicly accountable. We need to encourage creative solutions to global challenges in dialogue with all the relevant publics which are involved and affected by how these solutions are actually implemented, and foster critical scrutiny of data use across different audiences. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Sabina. Very good. I mean, I'm a horrible journalist, so therefore a bit sort of cynical and very suspicious. And I'm particularly suspicious of big data because I know how well it's used by politicians to help their campaigns and by advertisers to get our clicks, clicks for cash. Do you share my suspicion about big data? And do you really think in the short term it's being used to exacerbate social divides?
I think the big problem I see now with big data is not the fact that we are using them. I think that's wonderful, and it really is prompting immense amount of innovation and discovery, and services which are extremely useful to the population and can be used to actually diminish digital divide. But what worries me is the fact that there is a tendency to think about the hype of big data as something which can be basically already exploited just by having the big data present somehow. Having the data available is all we need. They're there somewhere, floating around. We have some infrastructure that are taking care of them, and magically, all of these wonderful results and all of these wonderful social implications will follow. And I think that's absolutely wrong. And the problem is that there needs to be a lot of investment into activities which are to some extent technical, which involve ethical monitoring, involve regulation, involve actually putting a lot of effort into making sure that the infrastructures we have are not just there for show, but are working. And we've seen a lot of examples, for instance, in the States, about infrastructure put together, say, by the National Institute of Health to disseminate and share health data, which have failed dramatically despite millions of dollars invested in them, because this type of regulation and this type of activity were not in place.
The sad thing, of course, is that regulation won't happen while big data suits politicians. But VS, very, very briefly, because I want to move on to Tommaso.
You know, like every technical tool, big data is a double-edged sword. Now, all of us want to use it if it's going to help us predict health conditions down the road, which we can treat today and reduce risk. But at the same time, the same technology can be used for lots of other things. So I'm not sure regulation is the answer, because we still don't understand exactly all the ways in which it can be used, but certainly we need to be thinking about it, as you suggest, Sabina.
Yeah, by the time we find out how it can be best used, it'll be too late to regulate it. Tommaso Calarco is the director of the Institute for Complex Quantum Systems, University of Ulm, and he needs a microphone, I think. Is that one not working?
What I need is a clicker, actually.
Oh, you need a clicker. Okay,
Yes.
Somebody will pass you a clicker. While they're doing that, let me tell you, he's been a member of the high-level steering committee for the Quantum Flagship Program, and he's a very persuasive man, because he persuaded the European Commission to give €1 billion to quantum technology. So over to you, Tommaso Calarco.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank very much Her Royal Highness for hosting us here. It's fantastic for me, not only that this is a World Science Forum, but also the motto, Science for Peace, like science has no borders. I will come back to that with my last transparency. I would like now to address, well, digital transformation from science. How can we get it? One example is from quantum science and technologies. So I have, well, these are some dear slides to me, because when I convinced Commissioner Oettinger to give us 1 billion euros, I had 15 minutes, twice as many as today, and 8 slides, so it's 125 million per slide, and I would like to show them to you. And, well, the first point I would like to make is that, well, science comes out of curiosity. We want to understand how the world works. Very fundamental, almost philosophical aspects. Actually, when the founding fathers of quantum mechanics started the research, well, they thought that making experiments with single atoms, it's impossible. Schrödinger said, one of the founding fathers, he said it is easier than experimenting with single atoms would be to raise dinosaurs in a zoo. And then, in my first week as a postdoc at Innsbruck University in Tyrol, I take my bike, I come out of the cellar, and in comes the Dalai Lama. His Holiness wanted to visit Anton Zeilinger, who, by the way, should have been here today, and to discuss some philosophy things. But at the same time, on the way to Anton Zeilinger, he went to the cellar, and he saw in the lab of Rainer Blatt, you know, you probably have learned in the school, such as myself, that you are not going to see single atoms with your eye. And then in the lab of Rainer Blatt, there is a nice trap. So it's a vacuum chamber, some glass, some lenses. In is a very tiny little atom sitting there alone, greenish. And then only lenses, and you can see it with your eye. And His Holiness didn't want just to hear an account of that, see a picture or a video. He wanted those photons from that atom to impinge on his very own holy retina. And there is a reason for that, because we can do things when we can manipulate these single quantum systems. If we didn't know how to master quantum mechanics, we couldn't have such devices. You are not going to build processors or lasers unless you can know and master the laws of quantum mechanics. But this is many bits per, many electrons or atoms or photons per bit. And now, with quantum technologies, the second quantum revolution, what we are able to do is to do 1 bit per atom, 1 bit per photon, and this brings in some new applications. So this is the second quantum revolution, and this is addressing such societal challenges as data security. We have talked about that, as machine learning to deal with big data, sensors for the Internet of Things, and enhancing enormously the capability of these systems with quantum systems, individual quantum systems, is what we can do, and I have a few slides to show you how to do that. So, while I wait that it pops up, let me click again. Okay, so maybe the next slide will pop up. Probably in the next slide, if it happens to arrive, yes, which it did, we can show that, well, Europe and around Europe, so to say, a lot of associated countries, for instance, Israel, but also we are trying to go beyond, like science is without borders, as I said. So we are trying to reach out beyond the borders of Europe towards some traditional cooperation partners, such as maybe the US, but also towards Russia, towards possibly and hopefully the Middle East, which is why I'm very happy to be here today. And we can build an alliance in which really we can bring these advances out of the lab and into real fruition for society. So now I have 3 slides with the 3 main applications. The first one is computing. Here is a view graph, and I'm very proud of this view graph because I showed it to a couple vice presidents of the European Commission, and it is a view graph from a scientific publication, and they asked questions, okay? And what it shows here is you might have heard about quantum computing. And maybe you have heard, perplexities, okay, will they ever build a quantum computer? Will ever a quantum computer outperform a classical computer? So here is a comparison between a quantum computer, a quantum simulator in particular, and a classical supercomputer. It is from 5 years ago. The most powerful supercomputer in Europe, in Jülich, Germany, was calculating that black curve, which is some magnetization property of some magnetic material. And then the quantum simulator was calculating the same, and up to a certain time, same result. But after that, well, the computing power of the classical machine is over. and the quantum machine goes on and provides some additional predictions about the properties of this material. And this is very relevant because with such materials, we can, for instance, if we are able to understand the properties of this, and I hope that someone will listen to my click, which I just clicked, but, well, because I'm told that it goes via some secret room. So, well, I hope that what will happen is a green keyword, which is energy. Oh, beautiful, it is coming up. Because if we can develop new materials, we can, for instance, have electrical conductivity at zero resistance and not have any more electrical losses in energy transport. So this is something which is very important for developing new technologies and also for the energy societal challenges. Another thing, communication. I send you a message. We know it. Snowden, Edward Snowden told us. Now comes the NSA, and you know, I have, as I said before, many million photons per bit. So now the NSA comes, and they steal a couple thousand photons. Nobody notices it, and they can read out through all your communication. Now, if I send you this communication via single photons, single bits, 1 photon per bit, a photon is a quantum. You cannot split it in half. Comes the NSA, either they leave it, or they take it all. But if they take it all, we will notice immediately. So once the communication succeeds, this is something that is completely secure. And this picture, when I showed it to Commissioner Oettinger a few years ago, was a science fiction. Entanglement, single photons through a satellite. Now, our colleague Anton Zeilinger proposed this 15 years ago to the European Space Agency. They slept on it for 15 years. In the meantime, his Chinese PhD student went to China, got a $2 billion from President Xi, and made it. So 3 weeks ago, there was a phone call between Zeilinger and his colleague in China via a quantum satellite. Security and communication, something we can do with single quanta. So this is, again, hoping that the clicker goes through, something that addresses the societal challenge of security. So let me click redundantly. Perhaps also we get the next slide. So I hope I get a discount on my time, because somehow here it's sort of...
I'll give you an extra 10 seconds.
Fantastic. Oh, this is beautiful. In 10 seconds, I can give you my last slide, hopefully that they will perceive my click, which is about quantum sensing. So this is sensors for the Internet of Things, and also for measuring very precisely, for instance, time. Why can we navigate with your GPS navigator in your car? Because there is a satellite which has a very precise time signal, which is received, and then you can know where you are, but only within a precision of a few meters. Now, with quantum systems and quantum entanglement, we can go down to a precision of a few centimeters or maybe millimeters, which is essential for autonomous driving. But we can also measure the tiniest fields, for instance, magnetic fields. It has been shown in real time, magnetic field from a single neuron when it fires, and at the moment, Bosch in Germany has started a pilot project in the new quantum technology initiative in Germany for creating a helmet which uses this technology, this quantum technology, with nanodiamonds in order to read your patterns in your brain in real time and drive a computer. So you see there is a broad range. It impacts all the aspects that we discussed before. Of course, it has also applications in terms of health, in terms of diagnostics, and so there is really a broad range, and we can answer to a lot of needs of our society with these quantum technologies, with a range of from short-term to long-term applications, and also, well, with an intertwined connection of many paths, which, you know, will bring us through taking all these lines of societal progress to fruition in the next, let's say, 10 to 20 years. So this is the reason why the European Commission now decided to fund this project, which is kicking off last week, and I'm finished with my 10 seconds.
That was incredible, very fast. And also, I think I've worked out the most expensive slide presentation in the history of the World Science Forum. I think it's about 10 million a slide. Just one question. What is the killer app for the transformation for digitalization?
Well, actually, we have a little bit of poor coordination here, because we agreed, you asked me, which question should I ask you? And I said, please ask me this question, because I wanted to say something which I hoped was new. But now it turns out everybody's talking about that, because I do think that the ultimate application of quantum computing is really to enhance strongly machine learning. You can testify, I said it before knowing what the others were going to talk about. So I really sense a lot of convergence here. So the holy grail somehow is having enormous computing power for, you know, developing all these applications in machine learning, in fact.
Excellent. It's all planned. Tommaso, thank you very much indeed. I just wonder and worry that this device, this head device that taps into the brain, when it doesn't work, do you what, switch it on, switch it off again?
Well, I will put it on only in some specific occasions.
All right, lovely. Let's move on to Dr. Elizabeth Politzer. Elizabeth is the co-founder and director of Porsche Limited, and she is a leading expert on gender, STEM, and innovation. Elizabeth now heads up Porsche Limited, UK, and jointly leads the development of the Gender Summits, Quality Research and Innovation, a global platform. And Dr. Politzer will look at the World Economic Forum's Brave New World, a utopia vision of a digital future where technologies will help tackle many industrial ways of working with new business models. Elizabeth, over to you.
Yes, it is my great pleasure to be here, and thank you to Jordan for hosting this event. It is my very first visit to the Arab country. I'm so sorry. But anyway, hopefully not the last one. So, yes, so I would like to talk about the fourth industrial revolution. It's a vision that has been announced by the World Economic Forum, and it's a vision, so it is still in the dream stage. And I would like to point out to everybody here, and in particular to the World Science Forum, the need to take a good look at this vision and how it is going to be realized. Because in the parallel universe that we now have, we have this vision of the fourth industrial revolution, and at the same time we have the UN Sustainable Development Agenda, and there is no connection between these two. And I think the connection has to be established. And my purpose of being here is to encourage that World Science Forum takes this on as the challenge. So this slide we have here shows the kind of images that represent what the fourth industrial revolution means to the World Economic Forum. It is a very global north vision. Of course, it is a good dream to have, much better, much more efficient manufacturing that has got less waste. But this manufacturing, if it's completely automated, might take manufacturing out from the developing world back into the developed world. And we have to ask questions. Do women really need to use 3D printers to print shoes so they match their dresses? I mean, what happens to the waste? And why is it that in the West, we will be able to use all the omics technologies to predict whether we're going to be ill or not, and yet in the developing world, all that we are offering is mobile phones. So here are some examples, and that really irks me, because the World Economic Forum has asked 800 technology executives to mention the kind of examples of what this reality will look like in 2025. So we're talking 7 years from now. And I have to put my glasses on because I can't see. Okay, but so one of them is that 10% of people will be wearing clothes with sensors in them. So 10% of the world population, this is like a whole of United States and whole of Europe. And I questioned this on the basis that what is it that the sensors are going to be measuring, and how are they going to be interpreting this information, and who is going to be using this information? Because believe me, everything we know about physiology is mainly from studies that use male animals and men, and not women. So if these sensors are trying to detect whether I'm about to have a heart attack, are they probably not going to sense that? And there's also the first robotic pharmacist. Well, 8 out of 10 prescription drugs that were withdrawn from the market between 1997 and 2000 in the USA, 8 out of 10 were more dangerous to women than to men. So when we're looking at these predictions, not only that they are really focusing on consumers in the West, but secondly, they are relying on knowledge that has got a bias, has got the white male bias in it, and also it's looking at the world that is not including everybody. So the question is, who is going, what this future is going to be like in that this fourth industrial revolution is going to create. And I think if it is realized the way it is being proposed by the 800 technology executives, and you just put in your mind who would be included among those 800. I'm sure you would not visualize anybody from the Arab world. You probably will not visualize too many black faces. You probably might visualize 2 women among them. So who proposes the vision is really very important, okay? And the real risk is, we used to talk about digital divide, but I think we really have to talk about digital inequality now, because if such a vision is realized as it is proposed by the technology people, it is not going to be based on the best science knowledge, and that a lot of investment in new knowledge will be required. It's not going to be based on that, and also will actually disadvantage a lot of people in the world permanently. And here are some examples why we should care about other people, not just the ones that we talk like us. And most of all the slides include women, because the people who are most excluded from innovation are the poor, and women are the biggest group among the world's poor. So if we focus on women, we will focus on all the weaknesses of the technological visions. And so we need to look at the UN Sustainable Development Agenda. There are 17 goals. There are 150 targets. So we are quite specific, what is it that we can do? And I think we should talk about digital transformation in relation to those targets, okay? Most of the world has not even experienced or benefited from the second industrial revolution, okay? Yeah. It is just not fair that in the global north we can just sort of accept the fourth industrial revolution and yet leave most of the world without energy, without access to health, without reliable internet. Most people have not even experienced internet. And there's no shortage of really important problems. How about applying the fourth industrial revolution to make sure that we can feed the world's population in, say, 20 years' time, where there's going to be 9 billion people? How about using the fourth industrial revolution to solve problems? There are 6 million car crashes happens every year. How about to do this? How about doing something about the 700 natural disasters that happen every year? I think we have the technology. It doesn't have to be so highly advanced, but it is advanced enough to do that. So I think I would like to suggest that while the World Economic Forum is proposing this drive towards economic benefits of technology, these economic benefits are not going to be realized with a really good science knowledge, because the technologies have to be smart, they have to be safe, they have to be secure. So we need science to be part of this, and perhaps World Science Forum could be the partner in how to reframe the fourth industrial revolution so it actually does benefit everybody. It benefits the poor, it benefits the women, and benefits all societies. Thank you.
You've covered some very important issues there that, I mean, I ask for a personal opinion, not a WF opinion, about how you best think this fourth industrial revolution, so-called digitalization, can close the wealth and gender divide that seems to be unchanged from the second industrial revolution.
Well, I think it's we have to really think about it. It's a very good question. I saw while I was sort of preparing for this, I saw a statement somewhere that if you look at the United States, which actually has got lots of ICTs, yes, the level of poverty in the United States has not improved, okay? So we have to think, what is it we're doing? Obviously, there were agendas such as information technology, ICTs for development, but they are based very much on like individual projects. I think we really have to be very strategic. And I think the Sustainable Development Agenda and the goals, the 17 goals, provides a concrete basis on which we could say, yes, poverty, health, education, all these things have already been mentioned. Yes, where is this knowledge that we already have and expertise that we already have? And we do have it, yes, and how we can work with the existing mechanisms. The OECD in 2015 announced and had a big meeting in South Korea on creating our common future together through science and technology. And I questioned them, what does our common future mean? What does together mean? What does science and technology mean? You know, we really have, we use these grand words,
I know.
and they mean a lot, superficially,
Yes.
but we have to pin them down, and the pinning down with the Sustainable Development Agenda, it's really very important.
You bet. Exactly. The devil is always in the detail. Our next speaker is Damon Horowitz, who I think is best described as working at the intersection of technology and the humanities. He's recently served as in-house philosopher, director of engineering at Google, leading a company-wide personalization initiative with a focus on data privacy issues. He's also taught courses in philosophy, artificial intelligence, and cognitive science at Columbia, NYU, Stanford, UPenn, and latterly San Quentin Prison. So he managed to get out of there to be here today. So another captive audience. Damon, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank our hosts. It's a pleasure to be here. And I appreciate having a venue like this where diverse contributions are welcomed into this dialogue. As a philosopher, one of the responsibilities we have is to be somewhat contrarian in the ideas that we advance. And so I'd like to offer something of a counterpoint to the themes that have been spoken about so far on this panel. A lot of what has been discussed here have been the benefits of what is called the digital transformation. And some of the challenges that have been addressed have to do with how to secure those benefits. In particular, how to make sure that those benefits are available to all, that there's not a divide between those who have these benefits and opportunities and those who do not. The questions are ones largely of exclusion. What groups are excluded from the digital transformation? And a challenge we face there is that technology itself has no ethics, as it were. Technology is beyond good and evil in a different sense than a human might be beyond good and evil. Technology is simply oblivious to ethical matters. So there's nothing about technology which will ensure that those things which we see as problematic ethically will be avoided. Happily, we have many experienced and competent people trying to address these issues of exclusion. I would like to bring up and provoke your ideas about perhaps the complementary problem of this digital transformation, which is the problem of inclusion. I want to look at some of the challenges of being included in this digital transformation. And that's because while technology does not have an ethics, there is a certain ethos attendant to the use of technology. There's a certain character to our mindset when we act as technological beings, when we enframe the world as a world in which we will behave technologically. I like to refer to this as a technological worldview, which is increasingly dominant in our discourse. At least the modern technological worldview starts from a premise that man stands over and against nature. The fundamental premise, which is different from an ancient perspective on technology, which is more attuned with nature. The idea is that we have control over nature, and nature is to be treated as a sort of standing reserve, which can be manipulated to better serve our ends. Now, this has been a compelling view to have because it promises that we can alleviate quite a bit of suffering through the efficient manipulation of nature to serve our ends. And as we have seen today, with increasing prosperity in some parts of the world, we're capable of transformations of nature which might have seemed unimaginable even half a century ago. However, when we adopt this stance of nature as a standing reserve and of our intentions as being the governing factor in how man should coexist with nature, there are several problems that come along with that. A traditional problem, which I won't linger on, is that often there's a form of cultural imperialism which kind of follows in the wake of our introduction of technological expertise. Those who control technology and the distribution of technology also get to establish the sensibility and the ideology of those who are in the greater culture where it's used. Moral betterment was the phrase which, a few hundred years ago, was most common amongst those who were talking about the opportunities for using technology in culture. But I would like to speak also about challenges from those participating in the development of technologies. With a technological worldview, there are certain values that we hold dear. We hold productivity dear, efficiency, optimization. We see all entities in the world as things which are functionally defined, and our concern is how to most efficiently achieve a function. This mindset is sometimes referred to as a device paradigm. We see things in the world, whether they're pieces of nature or objects that we possess, as devices which we will swap out if we can find some way to more efficiently perform their functions. This includes, of course, human labor. So just as a technological worldview sees nature as a standing reserve to be exploited to better serve our needs, eventually the technological worldview sees human beings themselves as a type of standing reserve which can serve the further optimization and efficiency of technological processes. The technological worldview is relentlessly utilitarian. It encourages us to look entirely at questions of optimization and at consequences that can be calculated. Metric-driven development, obviously, is the way that we arbitrate our affairs in the modern first world discourse. But only those things which can be captured by our metrics will be respected through a technological worldview. A technological worldview excludes, and somewhat violently excludes, elements of our experience which cannot be captured by metrics. Yesterday in the plenary session, right here, an example that came up was subsistence agriculture, not used in a pejorative sense, but in the original sense, where there's an entire system where, say, within an individual village, there's a gathering of forces, an understanding of craft to cultivate the land in order to feed the immediate community. And there are cycles and respect that are part of this and deep communication between the participants. This type of focal practice, this type of gathering of forces, is something which is not encouraged by a technological worldview. A technological worldview pushes all of us to find our smaller role in the larger, efficient mega machine, as it is sometimes called. And so those aspects of our experience, which range from our spiritual beings to the way that we take pride in the full and interrelated aspects of our work, are sometimes pushed aside by the technological worldview.
Damon, I'm going to stop you there. I mean, I'd love to talk about what part spirituality plays in the development of technology. And also, I think where you were going was robotics. Is technology leading us, or are we leading technology? I think that's basically what you're saying. But Elizabeth would like a question to you. But again, Elizabeth and Damon, very briefly, if you will.
Well, you mentioned inclusion, which is a very important point, how to do it. The slide that people have not seen was the one with Einstein's quote, where he said, we cannot solve our problems today with the mindset we had when we created them. And I think that's why we need to think of new ways. But there is a way of being inclusive. I was given an example in Peru. A boat goes up the Amazon to the regions, remote regions. 10% of the population live in 60% of the inaccessible land in Peru. It's the state that goes to the people as opposed to the people that go to the state. The state delivers services. The boat goes up and delivers the services that people would normally expect if they lived in the cities. So there is a way of being inclusive with technology, and I think that's the way we have to look at it. We have to look at it as an opportunity to be inclusive.
So we have to be optimistic. Damon, do you want to reply very briefly?
The state, insofar as it is technologically minded, would like nothing better than to provide robots which could perform these services.
Neither male nor female.
Which may transcend, as you say, our previous categorizations of people. There was an excellent demonstration yesterday of the humanoid robot here, which is an engineering marvel, but is entirely unhuman-like with respect to the ways in which we would like to interact with each other.
All right, thank you. Could we have the lights up? Because although we have very little time at the end of this session, I don't know if anybody has a question they'd like to put. And I won't take a statement, and I won't take a long question. You have to be really seriously curious and brief with your question. So who is first? I think a gentleman at the back there standing up. I'll take your question first, sir, and tell me who you are and who you want to answer it, and keep it brief.
Very brief. Thank you very much. I'm Muhammad Saidam from Royal Scientific Society. I'm also a member of the 2019 GSDR independent group of scientists. And I specifically want to address my comment to Elizabeth about the importance of answering the call for inputs and the digital revolution and how it can be used in transformation towards achieving the Agenda 2030 and SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Elizabeth?
Well, I was hoping I'm going to find answers here because this is a new idea that we have started thinking about this because in the Sustainable Development Goals, gender has got its own goal. It's about empowerment of women and human rights. And yet when you look from it from a scientific point of view, every SDG target has got some component that requires understanding of how women and men might benefit from research and from development. So we are at the beginning of the journey, but please come and tell me, because I really don't have the answer at the moment.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Lady down here.
Dominique Leglu, I'm the director of 2 magazines in France, La Recherche, the research, Science et Avenir, Sciences and the Future. My question is for both Tommaso and Sabina. Tommaso Calarco explained to us that in the future, with quantum prodigies, we'll have totally very well done communications and nobody will be able to break them.
Yes.
And at the same time, Sabina says that we need to have ethical ways of sharing data.
Right.
But if you can hide very well all your data, how can that be ethical? We're in a time where many journalists publish about the Paradise Papers.
Your question?
My question is, do you really believe that we can improve, I don't know where, how to be ethical? I doubt it.
All right, and who do you want to answer that?
Either Sabina or Tommaso.
All right, well, if you both sort of give 30 seconds, because it's a good question about ethics.
So I was going to, after this session, I was going to go to give my business card to the gentleman here to my left, because we need, so we are starting this new adventure, and the question you are asking is central, and as he said, the technology is agnostic per se to ethics, and this is enormously important. We are considering really establishing even a module, an entire module of our program to answer these questions. Of course, I mean, I get asked the question, I mean, but then terrorists can use quantum communication to plan their things. Yes. But also people can use quantum communication to keep their private information secure. And both are possible, And so it is not technology which is going to answer how we are going to use technology. And it is central, it's important, and it is true that this question is never asked sufficiently, and certainly not yet sufficiently in our circles. And thank you for asking that. We have to work a lot towards answering that.
Thank you, Tommaso. Sabina?
So thank you very much for the question. I think my concern is with the fact that there's been a lot of talk about how to be ethical about access to data, making data available. So the Paradise paper, an example of this, WikiLeaks, a very good example of this. The idea being that, well, you know, if we manage to achieve these, to get access to these kinds of information, then we're going to be able to evaluate ethically how it can be used. And while I agree on the idea that actually in many cases having open information, particularly around how kind of big institutions work, can be very useful, I also think it absolutely is not where thinking about ethics stops. And in fact, I think it's not only possible, but really necessary to think about particular cases of data use and data interpretation. In fact, I think that's where ethics becomes the most important weapon we have to really think about this. And it also becomes much easier, because it becomes easier to really investigate and find frameworks in which you can interrogate step by step. How is it that we're marshalling this data? How is it that we can pass them around? Who is responsible for speaking for the data? And I think, as we've seen very clearly in the case of WikiLeaks, for instance, there is a whole array of spokespeople for the data, which are pushing forward, because the information typically is just too much for people to absorb what big data may be just by looking at it. Typically, we still need intermediaries, and scrutinizing what the intermediaries are doing and how, I think, is really essential, and that's where we can intervene more.
That's a really good answer, Sabina. Thank you for that. This has been a great session, and it's a lovely way to conclude the session to talk about ethics, I think. I'm afraid, lads, we can't take any more. We're bang right out of time. So, but thank you for your attempted question. It's been informative and, I think, illuminating, and thank you all for taking part. The unprecedented pace of change in the last decade is likely to be repeated in the next. So I think hold on to your hats, because we're in certainly for a bumpy ride. Our sons and daughters in the next generation will live in a world that's been profoundly altered by the fourth industrial revolution. Now is the time to start making sure it's changed for the better. And hopefully we've made a start on that today. Minister, thank you. VS, Sabina, Elizabeth, Tommaso, and Damien. Thank you all very much, and thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the session is now concluded. Your next sessions will begin at 11:30 a.m. Thank you. السادة الكرام، انتهت الجلسة. الجلسة القادمة ستبدأ الساعة 11:30 وشكراً.